Kelly is a fourth-generation farmer and certified executive coach who holds an MA in leadership from Royal Roads University. Kelly has been formally coaching in the ag space since 2017. Initially working with farm families, primarily dads, next gens, and their siblings, Kelly's work expanded to include cohort-based coaching through our joint venture, the National Farm Leadership Program. Often in agriculture, we try to put the technical solutions ahead of the readiness of people. And when this happens, the outcome is often resistance, maybe stress and anxiety as well, speaking from experience. So Kelly's primary interest is in equipping and supporting people to adapt to their changing environment, roles, responsibilities, and relationships. Over time, this becomes a catalyst for personal innovation and growth that underpins their professional success. Personal success, too, I would add. So please join me in welcoming Kelly to the stage. She's already on the stage, but please join me.
Hi, everyone. Everyone, can you hear me okay? More? Louder? Good, good. Thumbs mean yes. Okay. Yeah, so thank you for that, Heather. Just to invite us a way to get started. I'm going to be talking about this idea of antifragile and what that might mean for agriculture, and a real honest talk about where we really are, and I'm going to get into some data, not like what we saw this morning. So just by way of interest, that's a QR code. I really encourage you to pull out your phone, open your camera, click on it, and this is where we're going to find out whether or not Slido checked us all out. And I invite you to answer it's just 5 simple questions. I'm just going to see if it works. I'm too close for it to work. Is it working? Yeah, it's working. So these 5 questions have been statistically shown to have a high correlation to personal effectiveness and bottom line business results. And of the over 100 battery of questions that often I will put people through, particularly the National Farm Leadership Program, those 5 questions have the strongest correlation. So just by way of a self-assessment, I just invite you to do that now. And we're going to get into that, what that might mean here and what we learn through the presentation. So antifragile. So I robbed that term from a guy named Nicholas Taleb. He was a guy that is concerned about systems. And his theory is that, is there a way to design systems, doesn't matter whether it's economic or production or financial. And he said, you know, what if we could design a system that the more adversity and the more difficulty it experienced, what if it actually got stronger the more it was messed with? And his example was, what if you had a FedEx box that fell off a truck, and the longer it skidded on the road, the stronger the box got? Wouldn't that be cool? And what if we could build that into all of the systems that we have? So when I think about agriculture, I think of farmers being really very anti-fragile, because what we're really talking about is this ability to adapt and evolve. And so my experience of this is that I think ag actually is quite anti-fragile. I think of 2 examples. You know, I've been around farming long enough, I can tell you our production systems have become incredibly anti-fragile from my dad's time. We've got weather happening out in the prairies in the last 10, 15, 20 years that only because of min-till, one-pass, high-precision seeding systems, we are growing profitable crops under growing conditions that my dad would have had a crop insurance claim on. And that's 100% due to the experiences that happened in the 1980s. And basically, I thank you to all Saskatchewan farmers with a welder, because most of that was developed by Saskatchewan farmers. The same thing is with farm business management. If I were to look at what happened as a result of the 1980s when interest rates went to the teens, 18%, which I've called, was the last mass extinction event for agriculture, I can tell you it rapidly changed what extension services did for training for farmers to prepare them to be successful. So my dad and I went to the same ag school at U of M. I actually saw my dad's report card. And you looked at the courses that he took: soldering, welding, carpentry, animal husbandry, and 1 course on bookkeeping. When I went to the school, same school later, nearly half of the programs I took were all farm business management, macro and micro accounting, marketing, budgeting, farm business management, like finance and accounting. We spent all of our time in understanding things like total cost of borrowing and amortization tables. And I'll admit it, that's pre-internet. You didn't do that off the phone. You had to get at a table and calculate that all up. And boy, I'll tell you what, I learned an awful lot, and it's driven how my farm is run today. Yet a lot of people still wonder whether or not ag is as anti-fragile as what we might think it is. And so the common threads around this are typically a lot of people believe that, you know what, farmers are not adapting. Well, I'll tell you what it is. Half of all farms are said to not have any business plan whatsoever. Only 1 in 5, as best we know, actually operates with a formal written business plan. Any advisors in the crowd? I've had some chats with you. Most of you have told me privately and confidentially, which I'm going to out you, is that most farms, they believe, are behind the curve on farm transition. And that's, I would be guessing, by the age of the farmers themselves. And lastly, I think we're starting to make a connection with mental health and ag, is that how much of this is really just farmers really being the boiling frog, that they're trying to succeed operating and behaving the same way that they've always behaved, but yet the conditions with which they're trying to succeed in are far more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what's the truth about this? So what I want to do here in the next few minutes is I want to show you, first of all, that we don't need to guess. Industrial psychology is really, really good at measuring the antifragility of farmers, or really what we call leader effectiveness, same thing. We know exactly the behaviors that correlate to personal effectiveness and bottom line business results, and I'm going to show you a set of data that comes from the National Farm Leadership Program. It's the average scores that have come in over the cohorts that where we've run the assessment. I want to highlight how farmers actually are doing against a global benchmark, by the way. So you'll be able to see how farmers rank up against a very large, robust global data set. See where they're succeeding. I'm going to show you where I think the challenges are and give you an indication about what I think is about that. And then lastly, I'm going to give my 2 cents about what I think maybe some of the shifts that need to happen both at the level of the individual, but also as an industry that we need to think about. So that weird looking thing is called the Universal Model of Leadership. This is a graph that when it's assessed, this is how the data comes out so people can look at it as a picture. I put it up here not because you can understand it, but just to let you know the actual level of resolution with which we look at things. But I'm going to take about 4 slides to show you what's on here, because it's going to help you follow along as to when I start picking out the data, where I'm picking it from. So the first thing, I'm going to show you something we spend like probably an hour going through with people, and I spend 2 hours debriefing them when they get their assessment. We're going to do this in 2 minutes. So apologies for the resolution. So the first thing is just know there's a top and a bottom of the circle. And at the top is this idea called creative. Now, these are the behaviors, and for behaviors, you put them together, it's called a competency. I think there's about 18 competencies up there on the top side of that green line. These are the behaviors that have statistically are shown to have this high performance and bottom line business results impact. And what we know is that these farmers are highly adaptive, they're highly engaging, and they tend to think in the collective, and they tend to think long term. What I do today, how's this going to impact me tomorrow? Then you got the bottom, which is what we call reactive. There's also a lot of farmers who score high in the reactive, and you can also be very successful. In fact, many farmers that have come in score pretty high in the reactive. They're running very large multi-million-dollar operations. But what we know about the reactive is that these kinds of behaviors, they tend to be what we call unsustainable and unscalable. So in other words, they take an incredible amount of energy to achieve the same results, and once the environment gets very, very difficult or your farm begins to scale up, many will just tell me, they won't say, I'm really feeling very unsustainable and unscalable. They don't say that. What they say is, I just can't keep doing this. We can't keep going on like this. Something has to give. There's also a left and right to this graph. So we're going to be measuring behaviors around relationship, both in terms of how I conduct myself and what it's like to be me, and also how I interact with other people. And on the right-hand side is this idea of task, which is really about how do I go about getting things done, right? And what is my attention and what are the behaviors I do towards that? So this actually just gives us 4 quadrants, and I'll read them quickly just to give you an idea of some of the resolutions. So you get this idea of creative relating, which is caring connection, fosters team play, collaborator, mentor and developing, interpersonal intelligence, selfless leader, balance, composure, personal learner, and integrity. And on the creative task, we get things like courageous authenticity, which is the ability to talk about what must be talked about. Community concern, sustainable productivity, systems thinker, strategic focus, purposeful visionary, achieves results, and decisiveness. You get the reactive relating, which is under these complying tendency of domain of conservative, pleasing, belonging, passive, and distance. And then you get, on the reactive tasks, you get critical, arrogance, autocratic, ambitious, driven, and perfect. So you get an idea where we're going. Now, that doesn't give you a whole lot. It's still really, really busy. So the cool part is that there's a high resolution setting and then there's a low resolution setting. So by a click of a button, I can just put this into the low resolution setting. And you can see we've got these competency domains at the top, which are relating, self-awareness, authenticity, systems awareness, and achieving, and these reactive domains of complying, protecting, and controlling. So you get an idea of what we're talking about. What does the data say when I do all of them? So by the way, this is about a small data set of about 6 dozen farmers taken over about the last 5 years. And what's important to understand about this is that we're not just about self-assessment. We're also talking about people who know them and have evaluated them. So you've got 2 sets of data already going on here. This is what it looks like. Super busy. All I want to show you about this is that if you see the beige shading, that's the rater scores. That's the people who know the farmers, who they invited to rate them, and they rated them. So these are oftentimes family members, coworkers, people who sits on boards with them. And then the black bars is the average self-score of the farmers in the data set. And you can see that sometimes they look the same and sometimes they don't. So let's dive in. What is this really telling us? So we go into that low resolution again. You can see the farmers are behaving both in that sort of creative side, but also in the reactive side. Neat thing to point out is that somehow you see that the self-scores seem to be sort of underrating themselves in the creative side, but they're way overrating themselves on the reactive side. This is important. So let's take a look around what I see and just to sort of lead you, because we could spend hours on this, but I'm here to give you the short Coles Notes version of what I'm noticing as I've gone through and worked with, nearly 60, 70 farmers inside of the National Farm Leadership Program. So the first thing we'll find out is that farmers are rated as being pretty complying bunch. In other words, they tend to be people who want to go along to get along. So they're rated against a global data set, and that's what that percentile score is. So this is important. So all of these, they ask questions and people rate them on a score 1 to 5. Those are then normed against a global data set of nearly 200,000 leaders from every dimension of leadership you can imagine, and nearly 1 million raters. And then they're compared. And when you get the percentile score, that means they're rank ordered. So in this case, for complying, they're in about by the raters, they're in about the 55th percentile, 54th percentile in complying tendencies. That puts them in the middle of the pack against the global average. Funny, when you ask the farmers themselves, they rate them in about the 82nd, 83rd percentile, which is a pretty darn pleasing bunch. This is normal because we're talking about predominantly family enterprise. So this just isn't a business. This is a business that's run with family members. And if you know anything about families, we know that the number one thing is we want everyone to get along. And that's nothing wrong with that. That works. The problem is that all of this going along to get along is often the enemy of results. And so there's a cost to all of this family harmony, as it does, particularly as it's with something that hasn't been updated or upgraded. And sure enough, the first thing you see is that the achieving scores are below the pack. So you see, on average, you're seeing the raters are rating farmers as really being in about the 42nd, 43rd percentile score against the global average. But if you ask the farmers, they know damn well it's half that. That means there's a story or narrative building up that the generation, by the way, it also speaks to who represents this group. So it tends to be more male than female in NFLP. It also tends to be people who are probably in their late 20s, usually 30s to early 40s. So these, in some cases, they are running the farms day to day. Sometimes they're still, the older generation is still actively managing, and they're faced with this idea of having to lead from the middle. They're telling themselves that they see a lot more decisions that need to be made, and there is lost opportunity out there. And I think the one that I think is most telling is under decisiveness, which has an incredibly high, I think it's about the second highest correlation to leader effectiveness, because not all of these competencies have the same amount of weight and matter as much. Decisiveness, the fundamental capacity to make a decision is paramount, as we all know. And farmers are ranking themselves literally in about the 15th percentile. Pretty hard. They're telling me it's pretty hard to get a decision made on the farm. And all of this not talking about what matters is affecting what I call the trust scores. So these check marks, these are the actual questions that they're asked and they're being scored against. Ideally, what we know about high-performing organizations, whether it's a farm or whether it's Tesla or whatever you want to talk about, is they strive for cultures where everybody tells the truth about what's going on and everybody wants to hear it. What this says is not so much. And here's the important part on all this. And this wasn't what I caught out when I was initially certified and started coaching. I didn't see this right away, but you have to remember, I spend about 2 hours with every client on the first pass when they go through it. And then we spend 3 days in a residency taking even a deeper dive into all this data. And then we spend 8 or 10 months working individually and collectively together to move to start taking a conscious shift to being able to learn how to perform better. And through all of that, which is really, I'm well north of 1,000 hours doing this stuff. I can absolutely tell you this gap, this self-score that they're rating themselves in like the 82nd or 83rd percentile in complying compared to how the raters, the people who know them, this is their family and people who work with them every day, rate them in the 52nd percentile. That about 34 percentile gap is the difference between what it's like to be me on the inside and what I got to put on and paste on every day to go out on the outside. When that gap's wide, that's not an arrow, that's a tension. And it takes a toll, and I think it's absolutely part and parcel of the high level of stress that we see farmers carrying around. So let's see how you guys rated yourselves. Your score's going to come up. Did anybody fill it out? What's going on here? Something's not working. And I can't advance the slide either. Give me a slide click. It didn't work, huh? That's a bummer. How many people, if you were to look at those 5 questions, rated yourselves 5s? How many people rated themselves mostly a 5 on those 5 questions? 4s. Okay, a few people. 3s. Lots of hands. 2s. And it's okay if you scored yourself a 1, put it up there. And I understand if you don't. Here's the thing about scoring yourself a 3. Remember, that doesn't mean you're middle of the pack. You got to norm against a global data set. And when that comes back, farmers see themselves overall as really being 20 percentilers. Back of the class. In spite of the people who know them best saying that they're solidly in the middle. So here's what I know about that. Here's what I know. I know that many people, after hours of talking with them, coaching with them, they'll often believe that they don't see themselves as a leader. And if you check into that a little bit more, they'll have a very specific idea of what a leader is and who they should be and what they look like and what they do. And they don't see themselves as that person. And they really don't think that they're good enough. And this leads to, you'll hear this in pop psychology, things like, competence compulsion, but also things like, I'm losing the term, imposter syndrome. And what we know about that, and what I want to check in with you is that if you rated yourself and you're more in the 2s and 3s, I want to strongly invite you to think about what your concept of a leader is. Because my personal opinion, having listened to people, is that agriculture and people in general don't have the first clue about what an effective leader really is. And I mean dead serious. They have no idea. Because everybody, it's like sustainable agriculture. Everybody knows that sustainable ag is on their farm, then you go to Ottawa. Turns out, different definition. I invite you to check that out, because what I can tell you is that there are effective leaders who are introverted, effective leaders who are extroverted, effective leaders who are very pleasing and high complying by nature, and people who are generally judgmental and disagreeable. And they all find a way to be highly effective. There's no one way. And it certainly doesn't respect gender. A lot of people will, there's a big, deep research on this that, it's better if you're going to be an effective leader, someone who's seen as tall, someone who's seen as extroverted, someone who's seen to be male, someone who's seen to have a big profile. So you might be thinking if you've got a high Twitter following or a high LinkedIn following that makes them a leader. What turns out, I can tell you, is that because I get these people in the course, and I also get people who no one's ever heard of before. And you know what? Some of these people you never heard of before have got whoppingly awesome scores and are running wildly successful farms. Not what you think. Here's the other thing I think, and I say this not only to you, but I say this to the industry. I think that one of the number one changes that we have to wrap our mind around is we have to stop this idea of looking for what's wrong, walking to the end of the problem with a solution and waving our hands that everyone needs to get on board, and then blaming everyone who doesn't get on board. It's human nature. So here's what I can tell you about this. When I got into doing this, I thought, well, this will be simple. I'm from ag. I'm just going to use the Liebig's Law of the Minimum. Just like in a soil test, we look for the limiting nutrient. We're going to look for the limiting leadership competency on the chart, which in this case, guess what? The lowest one was interpersonal intelligence, which, by the way, those are the 5 questions, which basically means how are you at conflict? How are you at having it out in a way that drives results? And what we find out is not so much. I thought, oh, this is simple. I'm just going to get like world-class intellectual property, and we're going to teach world-class learning conversations with people, and we do this, and they'll be fine, and they'll be good. Except the part I didn't understand is that when we have farmers who rate themselves in the 83rd percentile in pleasing and complying, guess who wins? The part of them that's been with themselves their whole life that says, you know what, whatever you do, don't create waves. Or your coach that says, if you just follow this list about how to have a conversation about it, you'll be awesome. I can tell you it doesn't work. And I can tell you I know this because when you check with them back 6 months later and you ask, so did you have that conversation? The answer is not so much. This is the destination. It's not where we start. And so much and this applies to the same thing that has gone on in agriculture. I don't care if it's even with farm business management, and I've had this conversation many a time with Heather, is that we've just believed that when farmers don't do the things around business planning, financial management, and farm transition, we just think, well, we just need more farm business management training. If we give them the knowledge, tools, and skills, these farmers are going to go out and be more knowledgeable and skillful. Except 4 decades running this experiment, we know that half of them don't have any business plans, and only 1 out of 5 do. That's a lot of energy for not a lot of results, to be honest with you. So there's a shift that has to occur. And this is what the shift that I believe it needs to happen, and this is the brutal truth. There's a lot of people in farming, and a lot of people don't know much about people. And it's for good reason. They went to school to learn how to be farmers. They learned to school how to be good consultants or agrologists or accountants. And if you ask them how much personal development, how much leadership training they took in all of those years, and the answer is pretty much 0. And then we wonder why people struggle with the people side of farming. And we wonder why people don't collaborate, and why we can't train up people, why we don't know much about delegation. This has to shift. And the exciting part about this is that, one, it's not about ag. This is a phenomenon that has been going on all across basic, if you want to know what coaching is, it's the adult development industry. It's pretty much what it is. It's growing adults. And I'm not talking about knowledge. I'm talking about growing nervous systems, ways of thinking and problem solving, showing up under pressure in the way we know we need to, not the way our body tells us we want to. Right? Getting out of our thought bubble, out of our head. So the exciting part about this is that what most people don't know is that for all of the advancements that have occurred in agriculture on the technology side, in terms of crop production, on the people development side, there's been all kinds of amazing developments. There are concepts and practices that I'd call personal development technologies that are available, and we're using them today, that didn't even exist a generation ago. They weren't even available to your parents. Some of this stuff wasn't even around 10 years ago. And it's shown to be far more effective in helping people grow so that they can show up the way they know they need to, when they need to, with whom they need to, and talk about what matters. And that there's a path forward for everyone, even if that seems like that's not you today. And that's pretty much my business, is finding people to do that. So I'm excited about the possibilities, but my message to you is that if, number one, if you don't think that you're a leader, I'd check out what you think the definition of your concept is, and if that's true or not. And secondly, if you're in the business of trying to help people or wanting to help people, I think it's time to start thinking about, as an industry, how much energy we're putting into growing people instead of growing businesses and crops. Because I can tell you at the end of the day, it's the people and their personal effectiveness that's going to drive all of that. And if we don't do anything about it, we're going to have lower results, a lot more energy, and ultimately we're going to have less farmers, and maybe a lot faster than we need to. The exciting part is that we don't have to be stuck anymore. There's some really exciting stuff going on. So, what's my time here? Yeah, right on 29 minutes. So that's my comments. That's my presentation. I'm happy to take questions and comments. I can show you about some of the opportunities we have. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to upsell or not, but the good news is that people like Farm Credit Canada have seen this. And so Farm Credit Canada is weighing in on it with an 80% discount coupon for our online version of training called LeaderShift Insight. So that's an excellent, and the cool thing about that is doesn't matter where you are, you can take part of this. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'm just welcome to see questions and comments. Thank you. Yeah, anybody have a question or a comment? At the back. Yeah, excellent question. They do the circle because what they found, the person who invented it, who put together all this theory, what they found is that, if you're high on one side, particularly on the reactive, if you're high on the reactive, you're definitely going to be low on the other side. So if you're high in complying, like for example, I put it up there, so one was passive, right? So passive is not am I not leading, I'm just literally trying to be invisible. And that usually shows up when we're under pressure. That is what I call the anti-leadership behavior, because that has like a negative 0.83 correlation to leader effectiveness. Compares to decisiveness, which is like a positive 0.83. So you can't be high in one and be high in the other. You're going to be low in one and high in the other. So that's absolutely right. And the goal, just so you know, thanks for that. The goal here is that most people think, well, man, I got to do all of this. And it's like, here's what we do. With proper training and coaching, our goal is to figure out where to get started, which is the idea of walking back to the end. And trust me, it's not about teaching people how to have tough conversations when they've never had one in their life. Like that's generally not, that's like saying I'm afraid of heights. Great, we're going to go to skydiving school. It's not where we start. What I can tell you is that if you can identify what that is and make that one shift, it raises everything. And people have no idea how all of a sudden they're doing better everywhere. So in that way, it is kind of like the Liebig's Law, but you got to look at it in a different way. Yeah, so basically what you're talking about is relating. So you're probably talking about people who work day to day on the farm. So that's a great question, because many farmers often don't want to spend any time on that at all. They just want to hire someone what I call no assembly required. Right? They just crack of the box, away they go. And what we know is that the act of leading is it's a social process whereby you're working with them, and it goes under all of those relating scores. So if that's not going to come up, I'll just show you real quick. I can back this up, I think. Is there a backup? Where are we going here? No. Why is the backward one putting us backward? It's weird how the backward slide doesn't. Well, I could do it that way. This is a different slide. Yeah, so if you look under relating here, and that's a dark shade up there. So you see caring, connection, fosters team play, collaborator, mentoring, and developing interpersonal intelligence. So what we know about that is this idea that if you're as a leader and you're spending time working with people and giving them tasks that they're capable of doing, and not just turning it as getting something done, but you're teaching something about what they're doing along the way, you can turn the most mundane task, like tapping on a bin, to see how full it is, and you can turn that into a marketing exercise, if you think about it. And when you start growing people, and then you start realizing what they're capable of. Like, so often what I find with frustration is that people, and again, how many people have had any professional training in how to delegate? Yeah, no kidding. And I'll tell you what, delegation is literally one of the most powerful development and farm transition tools there are. If you decide you want to get yourself a black belt in delegation. Because delegation is the idea of giving people something to do that's within their capacity, but maybe a little bit more, and creating a relationship with them that helps them succeed within the realms of what they're capable of doing. And if you do that right, you take something where if they're tapping on bin to the next thing you know, they're actually doing all the inventory management, all the grain quality management for your farm. It becomes a complete role by the end of it. So part of that is being able to work with them, and you might find out that maybe that's not what they're all about. Maybe they don't want anything to do with that. A little bit, but it's also about relating. It's also about relating. I can tell you how many leaders just want to tell people to do something and then they just leave. And then they wonder why things don't go well. Yeah. And again, I think there's this idea that, and again, so not to take, I'll put into this why this is challenging, because one of the number one challenges I see paradigm shifts between older farmers, I'd say baby boomers, and newer farmers, is that they have a fundamental difference in the value of people. And there's a fundamental difference between the level of trust that an older person will have with someone versus someone younger. And that's why they'll end up doing everything themselves, because they can't bridge that gap. Oh yeah. For how long? And how much? Yeah. Guarantee you. I mean, so I'll give you an example about the investment that this takes, but just whether or not you're in a commitment to growing a sustainable and scalable farm. So we run an air drill that's like 127 feet long from the front of the grill to the back. I mean, it's a 3-train. This thing's ridiculous. So that's the way it runs out in ag out in Manitoba. And I've got kids who've never run a drill before, like my son. And so they're looking just going like, how are we going to possibly pull this into a field or do anything? And so I said, okay. And they were absolutely sitting there like they're getting their colors changing in their face as they hook this all up in the yard, and they're looking there, so like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, what am I going to do? Because it's like, I'm not running that damn thing. There's just no way. Because that monitor in there, I can't tell them, but I don't know how to run it. They do. But I know how to drive this thing. So we find a way. The first thing they do is it's march, it's able, we get them to ride around the road, drive in the vineyard, drive out. It's all in transport, and they just drive around for a whole afternoon. Right up the yards, doesn't matter. They know it. Then you get into a field. Oh, I'm not sure about that approach. Got to stop. Sure, it's going to take 20-minute conversation to talk about how we might pull this thing into it and where we need to turn to fill. Yeah, it took 20 minutes the first time. Never spent that again ever. And now they've done it for years. That's a mentality that a lot of farms just can't. They feel so overwhelmed with the amount they have to do that they don't have enough. Actually, they need more people, not less, because they need to have more time, and more time is you can need more people to do it. Yes. You have to keep the which, I'm sorry? Yeah, so I'll tell you, so again, that's a great question. So number one thing is, it depends whether you see people as an investment or an expense. Technically, on accounting, they're an expense. I can tell you, if you want to get stuff done at a really high level, they're an investment. And what I can tell you is that there is a whopping difference in perceptions between the generations about whether they see that or not. And so that is something where, for example, a lot of people just say, well, we've only ever paid this amount of money, and they're like, okay, you're trying to hire a labor, but you're complaining because they can't think and act independently problem solve and be proactive. It's like, are you sure you're paying for that? Right? Like a laborer is someone you work beside them, you tell them to pick up something, move it over, sit it down. Oh, you're looking for an operator. You're looking for someone who's at a whole nother level. And I can tell you the amount of disasters I hear about, $10, $50, $100,000 wrecks. Like they'll get a couple of these a year, where it's like $100,000 in nonsense. I said, you know, is it possible for the want of another $10,000 a year, like a salary bump, that you could attract someone who could actually just take care of all of that? And again, that is a generational mindset around between people about the value of labor and the value of hiring talent. And part of it holds with, again, underlying core beliefs that have been existed inside that family about the value of people. Then those have to be surfaced up before we even think about the idea of delegation, because they're like, what do I need that for? And who in you says that? When are you better off maximizing? How much time do I have left? So I'll take some questions. Did I miss anybody? When are you better off maximizing strengths versus working on small improvements and weaker competencies? Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to try and do this as fast as possible. So here's the problem. Here's the thing. Many people, there's this mindset around, like, you know, don't work on your weaknesses, just stay in your strengths. Because they know how hard it is to grow. Yeah, you're absolutely true, especially if you're a consultant and you got to deliver results in about 30 days or you get fired. If you're very short-term thinking, this is a thing. Here's what I'll tell you about that. What happens if your limitation is absolutely not a limitation? It is basically a fatal flaw. Now what? I think that's true under conventional, what I would call, adult development technologies. We're in the business now of helping people not just improve a competency, but improving themselves and how they think about the world and what they believe about the world, and getting it all surfaced up. And what people don't realize is that if you work at that, and I would say when clients privately, like let's say bi-weekly meeting for about an hour and a half, 4 to 6 months, people all of a sudden can show up more of themselves instead of the same old ways to get the same old results. And when they get that part right, those competencies disappear. In other words, we don't actually teach a lot of learning conversations anymore. If we can get people to show up so they're just not completely ensorcelled by the policing part of themselves, it's amazing how many stories I hear now that people can show up and they can strike the right tone, say the right words, and say it at the right time without any training. Because people have been learning to talk since they were pretty much born. So it's a different approach. Is there a variation in the results based on the age of the farmer? Do younger farmers skew towards having better people skills? Yes and no. If you get them super young, they don't like to even make eye contact. They like to talk and text. I look at that one about the idea about the capacity to change and to grow, because basically all of what I'm talking about is leveraged under a phenomenon called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is this whole ability that humans have to basically adapt to our experience. And this underpins things like memory, learning, personality, like you name it, it underpins like our entire, it's the underlying magical thing that allows us to change like even our beliefs. And so what I can tell you about that is that and I used to teach like lifeguards, like kids are 16 years old. I used to thought I was a really good instructor because a 16-year-old is like their neuroplastic potential is just like 6,000 RPM. Like it's just, you just do it, show them CPR. It's like, I do it fast, I do it slow, you do it with me, off you go. Amazing. Get a 40-year-old mom who comes into the course because she's going to help out at the pool. And I swear, I thought all of them were something wrong with them. Like they all were learning disabled. But here's the thing, they're just different people at different stages of development. And the person who didn't actually know how to coach them was me. So we can change, and our neuroplastic potential stays with us, but it actually does diminish as we get older. So starting earlier, particularly this training on young farmers, and why that's the emphasis on young farmers is important. What's the typical age of farmers you work with? I've coached everything as young as 18 all the way to 73. Sweet spot is, I'd say, 30s to just early 40s. Most of them are ones who have struggled to take over the farm, and they've taken over the farm, and they're realizing their dreams, and then they realize that how the dream makes them feel isn't what they thought it was going to be. Or the old phrase, heavy wears the crown. And they are looking for a way they realize that they got to figure a different way here, because this is just not fun. You mentioned low uptake for business advisory services. What is the uptake like for personal development coaching you offer? What is the uptake like? I don't know how to answer that. Is the uptake, did I say that? That's low uptake for business advisory services. I think what I meant by that, if I said that incorrectly, I just think that a lot of people, there's a lot of frustration about wondering why people don't adopt these technical solutions. And what the problem with that is that the person has to be there that's willing to do it. So for example, I have a client who wants to get a whole series of spreadsheets going for his farm, and he can't. And I'm like, and this has been going on for like months. And I said, like, and he's finding, he's a lot of self-loathing. Like, he's like feeling really bad. It's like, I mean, I've got Excel on every one of my apps, and I can't. He literally said, and I can't click on it. I said, do you want to sort that out? He's like, oh, and I'm like, no, do you want to sort that out? He's like, okay. So over an hour, what we identified was that one of the mistakes it made is that the perfect part of him didn't really want to start because I showed him mine. And he said, I'm going to do it, and then you're going to ask me to see mine, and then mine's not going to be as good as yours, Callie, and I just can't bear that. I said, dude, I showed you my best one. I said, here's like slide 7. It doesn't even have color, it has no font, it doesn't even have any formulas. Oh. The other part was, I said, and then the other part is, well, I just can't do it because I think there's a part of me that doesn't actually want to see what I find. I can barely handle what's going on today. I don't even want to know what I don't know. All right. Now we're getting somewhere. So over time, when we start surfacing up these unconscious beliefs and we get them up so we're aware of them, and you're like, well, how's that working? And then we start surfacing the other side. Well, what if you did know? What would that be like? Like if you had all this forward looking, and what might be possible for you? Now, this sounds like we're just coaching, talking back and forth, but this is actually a neurological game where I'm creating a prediction error in their head that says, oh, if I go and look, whatever, I might find something bad. Now I'm just entering a prediction error that says, no, if I go look for it, I might find something possible, like something positive. I may be able to see an opportunity. And if you run that long enough, over time, their mind changes. They literally change their mind. At no time did I recommend him take an Excel spreadsheet course. What are some techniques to improve decisiveness? Are succession plans not happening because indecision, lack of action when we don't have all the information? Great question. It depends individually about where your stuck spot is and who in you is not committed to doing that. Is it because you're not executing, or is it someone in your family, and why is it you're not moving forward without them? Like, I'd have to get deeper into that. This is very, very common. I can tell you a path about how complex this can get. It can be, well, if father and son aren't talking, literally cannot talk without throwing hands, we're a long way from talking about farm transition. And if we can get them on the page about why it is that they're literally getting on each other's skin so difficult, then we get them going along and getting along and taking care of themselves. Now they can sit down with grandpa. There's tons of reasons involved, and sometimes it's about non-farming siblings, but it's not about that. It's about what's really going on. And most people think, oh, I don't want to go there. And I'm like, you know what? It's not as scary as you think if you got the right support. And when people realize, like, once they think, because they think it's like this incredible, like they literally, and I've had people telling me, it's like they feel like they're standing on the edge of a tall building. And to go and do that thing feels like they're literally stepping off into an abyss. Except with enough time and practice, they realize there's actually it's not even real. It's just that. I mean, I can't even roll my ankle unless I try it hard. And when they figure that out for themselves, they can do that over and over again. That's the other part. It starts generating. This growth starts generating more and more in it, and they can start applying in other places. How do you bridge the exhaustion barrier with producers to get themselves interested in doing this work? Okay, so that's an excellent question, because this is the part people don't realize about burnout. There is so much unconscious chronic stress in agriculture that's going on for so long in many people, that it has been going on for so long that their nervous system has actually adapted to it. And this adaptation to this long unconscious chronic stress, and again, ask yourself if you're a person who has good intentions, but by about 10 o'clock every day, your day starts to go sideways. Does that describe you or someone you know? That can be an often question I'll ask. What I can tell you is that if people operate under this chronic unconscious stress for so long, it shifts their nervous system, and it shifts it away. It shifts it to survival and what we call the sympathetic nervous system. You don't need to know that. But it's basically this dealing with the problems in front of you, putting out the fires today. And it de-emphasizes the actual executive intelligence part of the front of their head. So they basically get a flabby think and act strategically muscle. which is, it's not a muscle at all, it's part of their brain. And so when a farmer tells you, man, I can't even think about my thinking right now, like talk to me in February, they mean it. So I've had a number of clients where we have to start thinking about what is a sustainable, scalable amount of work that they can handle so that they can get their symptoms down, so they can actually physiologically recover to the point where they're literally, their nervous system's at a point where they're prepared to think and act strategically. And most people are sitting in front of accountants and they're like that, and the accountant's frustrated and they're like, and they can't get out of there fast enough. Who's wrong? What's the problem? That has to change. And a lot of that, I hate to say it, a lot of that is education. Because the problem with burnout is it really is the boiling frog. People have no, and I say this from real experience. Having been so burnt out, like I don't know if anybody suffered from chronic burnout, but chronic burnout is to the point where it's almost, I think it's a lot like a boxer, frankly, who's taken too many hits to the head. Like, it changes you forever. It can take you months to recover, like from a concussion. And so until farmers are actually realizing that, all this hard work actually isn't setting them up for success and isn't actually driving performance, and again, that comes down to a part of them that which is what we call pusher. This is when in doubt, we're just going to work harder. Until we break that unconscious thought and belief that says the only way we're going to get things done is I'm just going to have to push harder, and realize that that's actually not, that has a very limited success rate for a very short time, and that there's something else, and that they can actually step into that. And if you can show that they can see that they're getting more results from that, that's when it all changes. Most people can't see themselves. When I get clients, they can't see themselves in it. And so that's why a lot of this will take help. Do I have time for one more question, or am I just going to say thank you, Heather? One? When do you do a 360 leadership assessment? It can be deflating, but through coaching, can you identify a couple of areas to focus on to shift? Can it be deflating? It can be. Often not with farmers, though, because they already are pretty deflated. They already rate themselves in the 20th percentile in leader effectiveness. It can't get much lower than that. They're in different spheres, though. You get people who you get the exact opposite. They think they're amazing, and then they get their scores back, and they're at rock bottom. You don't see that in ag, but it does happen wider. So I would tell you it's not typically a problem. What we do is once people have enough, what I would call leadership IQ, and they get that score, and particularly with the new ways we're doing it, what we're finding is that people look at it and they see right through it. They're like, now I get it. I can totally see that. I went through the questions. I totally understand who in me is driving that behavior, and I can see why I thought that was really working and when it did work, and I can totally see why that is not going to get me any further than where I am exactly right now. How do we change this? So actually, for many people, it engages because farmers are natural systems thinkers. And that whole presentation is that we can break leadership, like the social side of farming and the human side of farming, into a system. Once farmers realize they can apply that kind of problem solving, just like they can get a tractor to start out in the field and they can apply it to people, they're away to the races. Thank you so much.